Since when do we let stray animals open the door by themselves?
That's what Craig Hollister said to a black woman standing right there in his lobby. Her name was Whitney Brooks, early 40s, black skin, natural hair pulled back.
I'm here to make a deposit.
The kind of quiet most people mistake for weakness. She held his stare.
What'd you bring, a bag of bananas? This ain't the zoo, sweetheart.
I'd like to see your manager.
Creatures like you don't even qualify to stand in this lobby.
The only animal I see is the one barking at customers.
Craig's jaw locked. He grabbed her shirt with both hands and lifted it. 6 people watching. A lanyard flipped out from under her collar. Federal badge, gold seal of the U.S. Treasury, spinning in the light for the whole lobby to see. Craig read it. And this grown man fear-pissed himself right there on the bank floor. Now let me take you back a few hours. Before the ripped shirt. Before the badge. Before Craig Hollister's pants told the truth his mouth never could. It's a Saturday morning in late September. Ridgewood, North Carolina. One of those suburbs outside Charlotte where the lawns are trimmed by someone else and the driveways hold 2 German cars minimum. Oak trees line the streets. The air smells like fresh mulch and expensive coffee. Farmer's market is already buzzing 2 blocks over. This is the kind of neighborhood where people smile at you, as long as you look like you belong. Whitney Brooks didn't grow up in places like this. She grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Durham. Her mother cleaned office buildings at night. Her father drove a city bus until his knees gave out. There was never extra money, but there were always books. Her mother made sure of that. Whitney earned every single thing she ever got. Full scholarship to Howard University, top of her class, MBA from Wharton, one of 3 black women in her cohort. 16 years climbing through the ranks of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, the federal agency that regulates every national bank in America. Now she was senior examiner in charge, one of the highest-ranking black women in federal banking oversight. She had the authority to walk into any national bank unannounced and tear its books apart. She could issue fines, suspend charters, shut entire branches down. But this morning, she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was sitting at a long table in a community center, surrounded by 12 young black women, college students, aspiring bankers, analysts, accountants. Whitney hosted this mentorship brunch every month, her way of reaching back and pulling someone forward. The brunch wrapped up around 10. Whitney hugged each of them goodbye. She grabbed her tote bag. Inside it, a small notebook, a digital voice recorder, and her federal credentials on a lanyard, all tucked away, out of sight. Because today wasn't just brunch day. Today was the day she'd been planning for 2 weeks. The OCC had received a tip about Patriot Heritage Bank's Ridgewood branch. The complaint numbers were ugly. Black and Latino customers flagged for suspicious activity at rates that made no statistical sense. Loan applications from minority applicants denied at 3 times the rate of white applicants with identical credit scores. Account closures with no explanation. Formal complaints buried in a filing cabinet and marked resolved without anyone lifting a finger. Whitney read that file and decided she wasn't sending a team. She was going herself. Unannounced, on a Saturday, in plain clothes. She wanted to see the branch the way a regular customer would see it. No warning, no preparation, no performance. She drove across town, parked a block away, and walked toward the bank. Patriot Heritage Bank sat on the corner of Main and Prescott like it had been there since the founding fathers signed the paperwork. Big stone columns, brass lettering above the door, a portrait of the bank's founder hanging in the lobby. White man, gray suit, firm jaw, painted sometime in the 70s. The kind of building that says, "We've always been here, and we decide who gets in." Inside, the Saturday crew was thin. Craig Hollister was running the floor, assistant branch manager, But today, with Gerald Watts, the actual manager, out golfing, Craig acted like he owned the place. Denise Pittman worked the teller line. Quiet woman, mid-40s. She'd worked at this branch for 9 years. She noticed things. She just never said anything. Eddie stood by the front door, security guard. Big guy, soft voice. He kept his eyes forward and his opinions to himself. Craig was in fine form this morning. He chatted up a white couple about their weekend plans, called an elderly white woman darling as he walked her to the door, laughed at a joke nobody else heard. Then a young Latino man stepped up to the counter with a deposit slip. Craig's whole face changed. His smile disappeared. He asked for 2 forms of ID, for a simple cash deposit. The young man handed them over without arguing. He'd learned not to. Denise watched from the next window. She said nothing. That was the world Whitney Brooks was about to walk into, and she walked in with her eyes wide open. Whitney pushed through the glass door and stepped inside. The lobby smelled like wood polish and recycled air. The floors were so clean they reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. Classical music played from a speaker hidden somewhere in the ceiling. The kind of music that says, "Calm down, you're in a serious place." She didn't rush. She stopped just inside the entrance and let her eyes move across the room. This is what examiners do. They look before they speak. They count the heads. They check the walls. She scanned the posted signage first. Every national bank is required to display certain notices. FDIC insurance, fee disclosures, equal opportunity lending. Whitney spotted the FDIC poster near the teller windows. The annual update sticker was missing. Small violation, but she noted it. She pulled out her notebook and wrote it down. Craig noticed her the second she walked in. He was leaning against the back counter, coffee in hand, telling Denise something about his weekend. Mid-sentence, he stopped. His eyes tracked Whitney from the door to the center of the lobby. He looked at her sneakers, her polo shirt, her tote bag. Then he looked at Denise and said, just low enough for only her to hear, $5 says she's lost. Denise didn't laugh. She didn't say anything. She just kept counting bills. Whitney got in line behind an older white woman making a withdrawal. She waited patiently, notebook in one hand, bag over her shoulder. She blended in with no one, and that was exactly what Craig saw. He didn't wait for her to reach the counter. He stepped out from behind the teller line, walked around the partition, and approached her in the middle of the lobby. This was unusual. Tellers don't leave their stations to intercept customers, but Craig wasn't thinking about protocol. He was thinking about control. "Help you with something?" he said. But the tone wasn't helpful. It was a challenge. Whitney met his eyes. "I'm waiting in line." "Yeah, I can see that. But I'm wondering, do you actually have business here?" "I do." "Because we get people in here sometimes who just wander in, looking around, wasting time." He let the word wander sit in the air. "You know how it is." Whitney didn't look away. "I have an account here. I'd like to make a deposit and ask about your loan products." Craig tilted his head. "You have an account? Here?" "That's what I said." He looked her up and down one more time. Slow, head to toe, like he was sizing up a stain on the carpet. "Let me see some ID." Now, let's pause on this, because what Craig just did was not normal. Banks don't require ID to stand in line. They don't require ID to ask a question. A teller asking for identification before a customer even reaches the window in front of other customers is not policy. It's a power move. Whitney knew this. She'd reviewed hundreds of branches. She knew every regulation, every guideline, every gray area that men like Craig used to push people around. But she reached into her tote anyway. She pulled out her driver's license and handed it over. Craig held it up like he was inspecting a counterfeit bill. He tilted it under the light, squinted at the photo, turned it over. took his time. "This doesn't look right," he said, loud enough for the lobby to hear. Whitney's jaw tightened, just barely. "It's a valid North Carolina driver's license." "If you say so." He walked her ID back behind the counter and typed her name into the system. Whitney stood alone in the lobby, waiting. Every eye in the room was on her. The older white woman who'd just finished her withdrawal glanced at Whitney, then quickly looked away. Craig found the account. His expression shifted, not to respect, but to amusement. $100 account, he said. He didn't whisper it. "That's what you've got. $100. He looked up at her. "And you're in here asking about loan products?" The couple near the window exchanged a glance. Denise's fingers stopped moving over the bills. Whitney spoke calmly. "The balance of my account doesn't determine the quality of service I receive." Craig smirked. "Sure it does, sweetheart." He tossed her license onto the counter. Didn't hand it back, didn't slide it across. Tossed it, like it was trash. Then he waved Eddie over. "Eddie, come keep an eye on this one for me." He said it loud, casual, like he was pointing out a shoplifter in a convenience store. Eddie walked over slowly. He stood a few feet behind Whitney, close enough to make a point. His eyes were apologetic, but his feet were planted. Whitney picked up her license from the counter. She didn't look at Eddie. She turned and walked to the waiting area, 4 chairs against the wall, next to a table with brochures and a fake plant. She sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and opened her notebook. She began to write. Craig saw the notebook from across the room. His eyes narrowed. He watched her pen move across the page, line after line, steady and unhurried. This is the thing about men like Craig Hollister. They need control. They need to know what's happening in their space. And a quiet woman writing things down, things he can't see, that's the one thing that breaks their brain. He walked over, stood right in front of her chair, close enough that his shadow fell across her notebook. "What are you writing?" Whitney didn't look up. "Personal notes." Personal notes. In my bank. Last time I checked, sitting in a chair and writing in a notebook wasn't a crime. Craig's voice dropped. "Are you casing this place? Because I've seen people come in here, look around, take notes, and the next week we get a robbery call." 2 things happened at that exact moment. First, the woman sitting 3 chairs away, white, mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, quietly pulled her phone out of her purse and opened the camera. She didn't say a word. She just pressed record and angled the phone toward Craig. Second, Whitney finally looked up. She closed her notebook. She held Craig's gaze and said, in a voice as flat as concrete, "I'm not casing anything. I'm a customer, and I have every right to sit here." Craig didn't hear a customer. He heard defiance. And Craig Hollister did not tolerate defiance. Not in his lobby. Not on his Saturday. Not from a woman who looked like she didn't belong. He stepped closer. "Stand up," he said. Whitney didn't move. "I said stand up." She looked at him the way you look at a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. And that look, that calm, unbreakable look, is exactly what sent Craig Hollister over the edge. Craig Hollister was not a man who heard the word no very often. Not from customers, not from Denise, not from Eddie, and certainly not from a black woman he'd already decided had no business being in his bank. But there she was, still sitting, still calm, still looking at him like he was nothing. His left eye twitched. "I said stand up." His voice was louder now. Not shouting, not yet, but loud enough that the couple near the front door stopped whispering and turned to watch. Whitney closed her notebook. She tucked the pen inside. Then she stood up, slowly, on her own terms. "Happy?" she said. Craig wasn't happy. He wasn't anywhere close to happy. Because standing up wasn't enough. He needed her to be afraid. He needed her to shrink. And she refused to do either. He pointed at her tote bag. "Open it." Whitney looked at his finger, then at his face. "No." "I have the right to inspect any suspicious items on these premises." "No, you don't. Open the bag or I call the police." "Then call them." Let me explain something about what's happening here. Craig Hollister had zero legal authority to search Whitney's personal belongings. Zero. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't security. He was an assistant branch manager at a mid-tier bank on a Saturday afternoon. He had the same right to search her bag as a cashier at a grocery store, which is none. But Craig wasn't operating on law. He was operating on ego. And ego doesn't read the fine print. He turned to Eddie. "Eddie, hold her bag." Eddie didn't move. His hands stayed at his sides. His eyes darted between Craig and Whitney like a man watching a car wreck in slow motion. "Eddie," Craig repeated, sharper this time. Eddie swallowed hard. He took one step forward, then stopped. "Craig, man, I don't think... I'm not asking you to think. I'm asking you to hold her bag." Whitney gripped the strap of her tote. Her knuckles tightened, but her voice stayed level. "Don't touch my property, either of you." Craig stepped closer. He was in her space now, close enough that she could smell his aftershave. Cheap, chemical, too much of it. Close enough that she could see the vein pulsing in his temple. "What's in the bag?" he hissed. "My personal belongings." "What's under your shirt?" The question came out of nowhere. But this was the moment Craig's brain had been building toward. He'd seen the slight bump under her collar, the lanyard tucked inside her polo. To any reasonable person, it looked like nothing. A necklace, a lanyard from work. Nobody would think twice. But Craig wasn't reasonable. Craig was a man who'd already decided Whitney was a threat. And once a man like that decides you're guilty, everything you do becomes evidence. "I saw something under your collar when you were sitting down," he said. His voice was loud now, performing. "You're hiding something." Whitney took a half step back. "Do not touch me." "Then show me what's under there." "I said, do not touch me." The lobby was frozen. The classical music still played from the ceiling speaker, soft and oblivious. The woman 3 chairs away kept her phone steady, the red recording dot glowing on her screen. The older white man near the brochure rack put his hand on the back of a chair, like he needed something to hold on to. Nobody said a word. Craig reached for her. His right hand shot out and grabbed the collar of Whitney's polo shirt. His fingers twisted the fabric. He yanked downward, hard, and the cotton ripped with a sound that echoed off the marble floor like a slap. The shirt tore from the neckline to her left shoulder. The fabric split open. Whitney stumbled back half a step. Her heel caught the edge of the chair behind her, but she didn't fall. She caught herself. A gasp came from behind the counter. Denise. Her hand flew to her mouth. Eddie froze like a statue. The couple near the door stood up. And the lanyard, the one Craig was so desperate to see, flipped out from under her collar. A federal ID badge swung free, spinning on the cord against her chest. The gold seal of the United States Department of the Treasury caught the fluorescent light and flashed. But Craig didn't look at it. Not yet. He was still riding the adrenaline, still buzzing with the rush of a man who just proved he was in charge. He turned to the lobby and spread his hands like a preacher addressing his congregation. "See? She was hiding something. I knew it." His voice bounced off the walls. "This is exactly why we have to be vigilant, folks. This is what I'm here for." Denise's voice cracked from behind the counter. "Craig, maybe we should..." "I've got this, Denise." He didn't have anything. He had just committed assault on a woman in plain view of 6 witnesses and at least 3 security cameras. But in his mind, he was the hero. In his mind, he'd just saved the bank from whatever this woman was planning. Whitney didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She straightened the torn fabric with both hands. Slowly. One side, then the other. She pressed it flat against her shoulder, even though it wouldn't hold. Then she lifted the lanyard so the badge faced outward. "You just put your hands on a federal officer," she said. Her voice was low, steady, each word placed like a brick. "You're being recorded by your own security cameras, and I suggest you read this badge very carefully before you say another word." She held it up. The gold seal. The name, Whitney A. Brooks. The title, Senior Examiner in Charge. The agency, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Craig wasn't looking. He was still barking at Eddie. "Detain her, right now! Detain her until the police get here!" Eddie didn't move. Eddie had already read the badge. His face had gone the color of old paper. Behind the counter, Denise picked up the phone. She dialed 911, not because Craig told her to, because she had just watched her colleague assault a woman in broad daylight, and she wanted it on record. The older white man near the brochure rack spoke up. His voice was shaky. "Son, I think you need to look at what she's holding." Craig finally stopped talking. The lobby went dead quiet. He turned back to Whitney, and for the first time he looked, really looked, at the badge hanging around her neck. Whitney reached into her tote bag. She pulled out a small black device, a digital voice recorder, standard issue for OCC field examiners. A tiny red light pulsed on the side. It had been running since she walked through the front door. She pressed a button and spoke. Clear, measured, like she'd done this 100 times. For the record. The time is 11:47 a.m. I am Senior Examiner in Charge Whitney Brooks, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. I am conducting an unannounced compliance assessment of Patriot Heritage Bank, Ridgewood Branch. The assistant branch manager has just committed physical assault against me in full view of customers and staff. She clicked the recorder off, placed it back in her bag. Then she looked at Craig. Craig hadn't moved. His hands, the same hands that ripped her shirt, hung at his sides. His mouth was open, but nothing came out. The air conditioning hummed overhead. The classical music played on. Somewhere outside, a car horn honked. Inside that lobby, nobody breathed. Craig's eyes moved down to the badge, slowly, like a man who already knows what he's about to see but needs his brain to catch up with his eyes. The gold seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. The eagle. The official letterhead of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and underneath, in black letters on white plastic, Whitney A. Brooks, Senior Examiner in Charge. Senior Examiner in Charge. Not a customer. Not a lost woman who wandered in from the street. Not a stray animal. Not a creature. The woman standing in front of him, the woman whose shirt he'd just ripped off, had the legal authority to shut down every single branch of Patriot Heritage Bank. She could revoke their charter. She could freeze their assets. She could refer criminal charges to the United States Department of Justice. And she had a voice recorder, and the cameras were rolling, and a customer had been filming from 3 chairs away. Let me slow down and tell you exactly what the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is. Because Craig clearly had no idea, and most people don't. The OCC is a bureau of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. It doesn't ask banks to cooperate. It doesn't send polite letters. It walks in, unannounced if it wants to, and opens your books. It reviews your loans. It audits your hiring. It checks your complaints. And if it doesn't like what it finds, It has the power to issue cease and desist orders, levy multi-million-dollar fines, remove executives, and revoke your charter entirely. Revoke your charter means you stop being a bank. Period. Doors closed. Lights off. Done. Whitney Brooks had that power. All of it. She'd used it before. Twice in her career, she'd recommended charter revocations that were approved. Both times the banks tried to fight it. Both times they lost. She wasn't someone who bluffed. She was someone who followed through. And Craig Hollister had just ripped her shirt off in front of witnesses. Craig's face went through 4 colors in 3 seconds. Red to white to gray to something that didn't have a name. His mouth opened. I didn't. The words wouldn't come. His tongue was dry. His lips stuck together. You should have. Why didn't you say? Whitney cut him off. Not with a shout, with a voice so calm it made the silence feel loud. I didn't have to. A customer shouldn't need to prove she's important to be treated like a human being. That line hit the room like a thunderclap with no sound. The older white man near the brochure rack lowered his head. Denise pressed her fingers against the counter so hard her knuckles went white. Even Eddie, 6'3", 240 pounds, looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. Because Whitney wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about every person who'd ever walked into that branch and been treated like less than nothing. Every name in that buried filing cabinet, every denied loan, every resolved complaint that no one ever resolved. She said one sentence, and the weight of 200 ignored voices landed on Craig's shoulders all at once. Craig took a step back. His heel caught the leg of a desk behind him. He stumbled, grabbed the edge with both hands to keep himself upright. His fingers were shaking, not a little, shaking like a man holding a live wire. The sweat came first. It broke across his forehead in a thin line, then spread down his temples. His breathing changed, short, shallow, fast. His chest moved like he'd sprinted up a flight of stairs. Then his legs buckled, not all the way. He caught himself on the desk. But his knees bent in a way that knees only bend when the body gives up before the mind does. And then came the stain. It started small, a dark circle on the front of his khaki pants, just below the belt. It spread fast, down his left thigh, soaking through the fabric in a line that gravity pulled toward the floor. Craig Hollister, assistant branch manager of Patriot Heritage Bank, the man who called a federal examiner a stray animal, was standing in his own urine in the middle of his own lobby. Denise saw it. She looked away. Eddie saw it. He took a full step back. The woman with the phone saw it. She didn't look away. The camera kept rolling. Nobody laughed. The moment was too big for laughter. It was the kind of silence that sits on a room like a weight. The silence that comes when everyone in the room knows they just witnessed something that can never be undone. Whitney didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't say a single word about what had just happened to his pants. She stepped forward, not aggressively, not with anger, with authority. She turned to Denise. Lock the front entrance. No one enters or leaves until law enforcement arrives. This branch is now under federal regulatory hold. Denise nodded. She walked to the door on legs that barely held. Whitney turned to Eddie. Ensure all security footage from the last hour is preserved. If any footage is deleted or tampered with, that is a federal offense. Do you understand? Eddie's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, ma'am. Whitney picked up the branch phone and dialed a number from memory. Her regional director at the OCC. The call lasted 45 seconds. She gave the branch address, her badge number, and a single-sentence summary. I need a full examination team and federal law enforcement at this location immediately. She hung up. She placed the phone back on the counter. Then she pulled a chair from the waiting area, set it in the middle of the lobby, and sat down. Craig slid into a chair across the room. His pants were soaked. His hands were trembling. His mouth was shut. The king of the lobby was sitting in his own puddle, and the woman he tried to throw out was running the room. 12 minutes. That's how long it took for the blue and red lights to appear through the bank's front windows. Lieutenant Carolyn Stokes stepped through the door first, 2 officers behind her. She was tall, sharp-eyed, black, mid-40s. The kind of cop who reads a room before she reads anyone their rights. She scanned the lobby in 3 seconds flat. A man sitting in a wet chair staring at the floor. A woman with a torn shirt sitting upright in the center of the room. A teller behind the counter with mascara running down her cheeks. A security guard standing with his arms folded and his eyes wide. And 4 customers pressed against the walls like they'd just witnessed an explosion. Stokes walked to Whitney first. "Ma'am, are you the one who called 911? My colleague Denise Pittman made the call. I'm Whitney Brooks, Senior Examiner in Charge, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency." She held up her badge. "I'm the one who was assaulted." Stokes looked at the torn shirt. She looked at the badge. She didn't need much more. But she did her job anyway. She was thorough. She took Whitney's statement first. Whitney spoke the way she always spoke. Clear, factual, chronological. No emotion wasted. She described the verbal abuse, the ID demand, the illegal search request, the physical assault, the ripped shirt. She mentioned the voice recorder. She identified the security cameras. She pointed to the customer with the phone. Then Stokes interviewed Denise. Denise couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She told the lieutenant everything. Craig's behavior that morning, the way he intercepted Whitney, the comments, the escalation, the moment he grabbed her shirt. She said something else, too. Something quiet. "This wasn't the first time. He does this. Not like this, but he does things. To people who don't look like our usual customers." Stokes wrote that down. Eddie confirmed everything. His voice was flat and exhausted. She told him not to touch her. Twice. He did it anyway. The customer with the phone, her name was Barbara Coleman, handed over her recording without being asked. "I got all of it," she said, "from the moment he told her to open her bag." Stokes had enough. She walked over to Craig. He hadn't moved from the chair. The wet stain had spread down both legs now. His eyes were glassy. His hands sat in his lap like dead birds. "Sir, I need to ask you some questions." Craig looked up. His mouth moved before his brain caught up. She looked suspicious. She was writing things down. "I was protecting the branch. That's my job." Stokes kept her voice level. "Did she threaten you in any way?" "No, but did she attempt to access any restricted area?" "No, but did she refuse to leave when asked?" She wouldn't cooperate. Did you put your hands on her, sir?" Silence. I was trying to see what she was hiding." Stokes closed her notebook. She looked at Craig the way a doctor looks at an X-ray they've already diagnosed. "Craig Hollister, you are under arrest for assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent." Craig's hands were cuffed behind his back before he could finish blinking. The metal clicked against his wrists. The sound bounced off the marble floor. Sharp, final, absolute. 15 miles away, Gerald Watts was standing on the 9th hole of a private golf course when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped away from his foursome. 3 minutes into the call, his golf club was on the ground. His hand was on his forehead. His mouth was open, but no words were coming out. Arthur Pemberton, regional president of Patriot Heritage Bank, was conferenced in 90 seconds later. When he heard the name Whitney Brooks, the line went dead silent for 5 full seconds. Then a single whispered word came through the speaker. a word that men like Arthur Pemberton only say when they know, with absolute certainty, that everything is over. He said, "Get our lawyers on the phone, right now, and shut that branch down before she shuts us all down." Craig was walked out of the bank at 12:14 p.m. Hands cuffed behind his back, khaki pants stained dark from the waist to the knees, head down, feet shuffling. He passed the teller window where he'd tossed Whitney's license like garbage. He passed the chair where he'd told her to stand up. He passed the spot on the floor where he'd torn her shirt. Whitney watched him go. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. When the door closed behind him, she turned to Denise. The woman's face was streaked with tears and guilt. Whitney said, quietly, "Are you okay?" "Even now, even after everything?" she asked. The next 48 hours hit Patriot Heritage Bank like a freight train with no brakes. By Sunday morning, the OCC had dispatched a full examination team, not just to the Ridgewood branch, but to all 43 branches of Patriot Heritage Bank across the Carolinas. 12 examiners, 3 supervisory analysts, a compliance attorney from the agency's Washington headquarters. They arrived with laptops, subpoenas, and the kind of quiet professionalism that makes bank executives lose sleep. Whitney wasn't leading this team. She'd recused herself. Conflict of interest, given that she was now both the examiner and the victim. But the investigation she triggered was hers in every way that mattered. She lit the match. The OCC brought the gasoline. What they found was worse than anyone expected. The Ridgewood branch wasn't an outlier. It was the model. Across all 43 branches, Black and Latino mortgage applicants were denied at 3 times the rate of white applicants with identical credit profiles. Same income, same debt-to-income ratio, same credit score. Different skin, different outcome. Accounts belonging to minority customers were flagged for suspicious activity at a rate 400% higher than white-held accounts. Most of those flags led nowhere, because there was nothing suspicious. It was just profiling dressed up in paperwork. Complaint files from minority customers were buried. Not lost, not mishandled, buried. Investigators found a filing cabinet in the Ridgewood branch's back office. Literally a gray metal cabinet shoved behind a supply shelf, stuffed with over 200 formal complaints. Every single one marked resolved. Not one of them had ever been reviewed by a supervisor. Craig Hollister's name appeared in 17 of those complaints. 17. Spanning 2.5 years, customers had written letters, filled out forms, called the branch hotline. One woman drove 40 minutes to file her complaint in person. Every single one of those voices was shoved into a metal drawer and forgotten. Gerald Watts had signed off on every single resolved stamp. His signature, a lazy, looping scrawl, sat at the bottom of each file like a door slammed shut. The examiners also pulled the branch's internal training records. Mandatory bias training, required by federal regulators every 12 months, hadn't been completed at the Ridgewood branch in over 3 years. The training module was listed as scheduled each quarter. It was never delivered. Not once. Gerald Watts checked the box anyway. Meanwhile, the video was doing what videos do in the age of the internet. It was spreading like wildfire through a dry forest. Barbara Coleman, the customer who recorded the whole thing on her phone, uploaded the video to a local community Facebook group Sunday evening. By Monday morning, it had 6,000 shares. By Monday afternoon, it was on Twitter. By Monday night, it was everywhere. The video was 2 minutes and 41 seconds long. It captured everything. Craig's voice telling Whitney she didn't qualify to stand in the lobby. Whitney's calm response. The moment Craig grabbed her shirt, the sound of fabric ripping, a sharp, ugly sound that made people wince through their phone speakers. Whitney's torn collar, the badge swinging free, and Craig, standing there with his mouth open and his pants turning dark. People watched it once. Then they watched it again. Then they sent it to everyone they knew. The hashtags came fast. Bank While Black trended nationally by Tuesday morning. Whitney Brooks trended alongside it. Patriot Heritage Bank became the third most searched term on Google in the United States for 48 consecutive hours. Comments poured in by the tens of thousands. Some people were furious. Some were heartbroken. Some shared their own stories, denied loans, suspicious looks, security guards following them through lobbies for no reason other than the color of their skin. The video became more than a clip. It became a mirror. Nadine Cole, a journalist at WCNC Charlotte, broke the full story Tuesday evening. She had the video, the OCC confirmation, Craig's arrest record, and interviews with 3 former Patriot Heritage customers who described similar treatment at different branches. Her segment ran 11 minutes, an eternity in local news. By Wednesday, it was syndicated nationally. CNN picked it up. MSNBC ran a panel. Fox covered it from a different angle. The story was no longer local. It was a national conversation about who gets treated like a customer and who gets treated like a threat. Former customers started coming forward, one by one, then in groups. A black school teacher who'd been denied a home equity loan despite a credit score of 780. She'd been told her employment history raised concerns. She'd worked at the same school for 14 years. A Latino business owner whose commercial account was closed without explanation or notice. He found out when his rent check bounced. No call, no letter, just gone. An elderly black couple who'd been told, in person at the teller window, that their Social Security checks weren't the kind of deposits that build relationships. They'd banked there for 11 years. A young black woman, 24 years old, fresh out of college, who applied for a starter credit card and was told she'd need a co-signer. The white woman behind her in line, same age, same income, was approved on the spot. Each story was different. Each story was the same. A class action attorney named Victor Davenport started collecting testimonies. Within a week, he had over 150 names. Within a month, that number doubled. Patriot Heritage Bank's board of directors held an emergency session on Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, they issued a public apology. It was 3 paragraphs long. It used the words "deeply regret" twice and "committed to change" 3 times. It convinced no one. The stock dropped 18% in a single trading day. 18%. That's not a dip. That's a cliff. Shareholders filed emergency motions. 2 board members resigned before the weekend. The OCC moved with the kind of speed that federal agencies usually reserve for national emergencies. They issued a formal consent order against Patriot Heritage Bank. The penalties were severe. $12.5 million in civil fines. A mandatory overhaul of all hiring, lending, and customer service practices across every branch. An independent compliance monitor, appointed by the OCC, paid for by the bank, for a minimum of 5 years, and a requirement to submit quarterly reports to the OCC documenting every complaint filed by every customer at every branch with full investigation records attached. Arthur Pemberton, the regional president, was forced to resign by the board. He didn't get a farewell dinner. He got a cardboard box and a security escort to his car. Gerald Watts was terminated the same day. The man who spent his Saturdays on the golf course, while Craig terrorized minority customers in his branch, was finally held responsible for what he allowed to happen on his watch. Craig Hollister's criminal trial began 11 weeks later. His attorney tried the only defense available, that Craig was acting in the interest of branch security and had reasonable suspicion that Whitney posed a threat. The argument lasted about as long as it took the prosecutor to press play on the video. The courtroom heard Craig's own voice calling a federal examiner a stray animal. They heard Whitney say, "Do not touch me," twice. They heard the rip of fabric. They saw the badge. They saw the stain on his pants. Jurors watched the video without blinking. One woman in the second row covered her mouth with her hand. A man in the back row shook his head slowly, over and over, for the entire 2 minutes and 41 seconds. A juror in the front row, a middle-aged white man in a gray suit, closed his eyes and didn't open them until the video ended. The federal charges were the ones that buried him. Assault on a federal officer, 18 U.S.C. Section 111, civil rights violations with potential hate crime enhancements. The U.S. Attorney's Office didn't hold back. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Raymond Sullivan delivered the sentence on a Thursday afternoon. The courtroom was packed. Cameras were not allowed inside, but sketch artists captured the moment. Craig standing with his hands clasped in front of him, his attorney beside him, his face the color of old chalk. Sullivan didn't rush. "Mr. Hollister," he said, "you were entrusted with a position of public-facing authority. You used that authority to humiliate, demean, and physically assault a woman whose only offense was the color of her skin. This court does not take that lightly. 36 months in federal prison, 5 years of supervised probation, permanent ban from employment in any financial institution in the United States." Craig didn't react. He stood there, empty, like a man who'd already been sentenced long before the judge opened his mouth. The class action lawsuit settled 4 months later, $28 million. The settlement included direct restitution to affected customers, a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in finance, and mandatory community reinvestment in the neighborhoods Patriot Heritage Bank had neglected for years. Whitney's name never appeared in the lawsuit. She recused herself completely. But every single person involved knew the truth. None of this would have happened if a woman in a polo shirt hadn't walked through a glass door on a Saturday morning and refused to leave. 6 months later, Whitney Brooks stood behind a podium in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with 300 people: bankers, regulators, policymakers, journalists. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The carpet was so thick it swallowed footsteps. A banner behind her read, "National Banking Compliance Summit, Equity in Practice." She was there because she'd been promoted. Deputy Comptroller for Compliance, one of the most senior positions in the entire office of the Comptroller of the Currency. The first black woman to ever hold the title. But that's not what people noticed first when she stepped onto the stage. What they noticed was the pin on her lapel. Small, navy blue, shaped like a torn piece of fabric. A reporter asked her about it later. Whitney smiled and said, "So I don't forget where the work started." Back in her office, on a shelf behind her desk, sat 2 things: a framed photograph from her monthly mentorship brunch, 12 young black women smiling around a long table, and a small square of navy cotton pressed flat inside a glass frame. A swatch from the polo shirt Craig Hollister ripped off her body in the lobby of Patriot Heritage Bank. She kept it where she could see it every single day. Her keynote speech that afternoon lasted 18 minutes. She didn't raise her voice once. She talked about the gap between policy and practice, how a bank can have 100 pages of anti-discrimination guidelines and still employ a man who calls a black woman a stray animal to her face. She talked about how institutions fail not when one person does something wrong, but when everyone around that person decides it's easier to look away. 300 people listened in absolute silence. Craig Hollister was 11 months into his 36-month sentence at a federal correctional facility in Eastern Virginia. He had no visitors. His banking license was gone. His name, when Googled, returned 14 pages of results, none of them kind. He would spend the rest of his life as the man in the video. The man who ripped a woman's shirt. The man who wet his pants on the bank floor. Denise Pittman testified fully during the investigation and the trial. She held nothing back. She described the culture Craig created, the jokes, the comments, the way minority customers were treated differently every single day while management looked the other way. After the trial, she transferred to a different bank. She enrolled in a diversity and inclusion certification program. She told a reporter, "I should have said something the first time I saw it. I didn't. I won't make that mistake again." Gerald Watts never worked in banking again. Arthur Pemberton moved to Florida and disappeared from public life. Patriot Heritage Bank survived, barely, under new leadership and a compliance monitor who reported directly to the OCC every 90 days. The 12 young women from Whitney's mentorship brunch watched the video. They watched the trial coverage. They watched Whitney's keynote speech. 3 of them changed their majors to regulatory finance. One of them, a junior at Howard University, wrote her thesis on racial discrimination in consumer banking. She dedicated it to Whitney Brooks. That's the thing this story is really about. Whitney didn't win because she was powerful. She won because what happened to her was wrong. She won because there were cameras, because Denise picked up the phone, because Barbara Coleman pressed record, because a system, imperfect, slow, frustrating, eventually did what it was supposed to do. But what about the times when there's no badge, no camera, no Barbara Coleman in the third chair? That's where you come in. Here's my question, and I want you to really sit with this one. If you were standing in that lobby, watching Craig Hollister rip a woman's shirt in front of everyone, what would you have done? Would you have pulled out your phone? Would you have said something? Would you have stepped between them? Or would you have looked at the floor, like Eddie? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it. I want to read every single one. And if this story hit you somewhere, if it made you angry, or made you think, or made you want to share it with someone who needs to hear it, then do that. Hit the like button, share this video, subscribe if you want more stories where the truth comes out, and justice doesn't just happen, it lands. Because at the end of the day, you don't need a badge to stand up. You don't need a title. You just need to stand.
Craig Hollister, 36 months in federal prison. Whitney Brooks, promoted to deputy comptroller for compliance, the first black woman to ever hold that title. But here what this story is really about. 200 complaints sat in the metal cabinet, stamped, resolved. 200 voices ignored. Whitney didn't win because of her badge. That badge didn't stop Chris from ripping her shirt off. What changed everything was the moment people stopped being silent. Denise picked up the phone. Barbara hit record. On a system that failed 200 times, finally worked on the 201st. Dignity shouldn't depend on what's hanging around your neck. It should be the default. So here's what I want you to sit with tonight. How many times have you watched something wrong happen and took comfort over coverage? And how many Whitneys out there never got justice because there was no Barbara in the third chair? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. If this story hit you somewhere, like, share, subscribe. Because you don't need a badge to stand up. You don't need a title. You just need to stand